You are living inside something that did not always exist. For thousands of years, humans woke when their bodies were ready and slept when darkness came. There were no clocks, no schedules, no hours. Then, slowly, something invisible was invented, and it began to take control. It divided the day into pieces. It told you when to work, when to eat, when to move, when to stop. On Echoed Reality, we will show you how this happened, how a tool meant to help became the thing that now rules every second of your life. When did time stop being something you owned and become something that owns you? The sun rises, the sun sets, a human wakes, a human sleeps. There is no number for the moment, there is no name for the hour. There is only light, and then darkness, and then light again. This is how it was for thousands of years. This is how people lived before time existed. Imagine waking up in a world where no one can tell you what time it is. There are no clocks on the wall. There are no bells ringing in the distance. There is no schedule, no meeting at 3, no work that starts at 8. You open your eyes when your body is ready. You eat when you feel hunger. You sleep when the sky grows dark. Your life moves with the rhythm of the sun and the feeling inside your chest. You are free, but you are also lost. You cannot plan, you cannot promise, you cannot say when you will return, because there is no language for when. Early humans lived this way for a very long time. They hunted animals and gathered plants. They followed the herds as they moved across the land. They watched the sky carefully, not to know the time, but to know the season. When the leaves turned yellow, they knew cold was coming. When the birds flew south, they knew to find shelter. When the moon grew full and then disappeared, they saw a pattern, but they did not count it. They did not name it. They simply watched and moved and survived. But something was changing. Humans were no longer moving all the time. They were beginning to stay in one place. They were learning to plant seeds in the ground and wait for them to grow. This was the beginning of farming, and farming brought a new problem. You could not just plant whenever you felt like it. If you planted too early, the cold would kill the seeds. If you planted too late, the food would not be ready before winter came. Suddenly, humans needed to know more than just day and night. They needed to know when the right moment was coming. They needed to predict the future. So they looked up at the sky. They studied the sun as it moved from one side of the horizon to the other. They noticed that in summer, the sun rose higher and stayed longer. In winter, it barely rose at all. They saw that this pattern repeated over and over, like a circle that never stopped turning. They realized they could count these circles. They could mark the days. They could prepare. This was not time yet, but it was the beginning. In ancient Egypt, farmers waited every year for the Nile River to flood. The flood brought water and rich soil to the land. It made the crops grow. But if you were not ready when the flood came, you would lose everything. So the Egyptians watched the sky even more carefully. They noticed that just before the flood, a bright star appeared in the early morning. They called it Sirius. When Sirius rose, they knew the water was coming. They could prepare their fields. They could move their animals. They could survive. This was the first time humans used the sky as a tool. The stars became a calendar. But the Egyptians wanted more. They wanted to divide the year into smaller pieces so they could plan even better. They broke the year into 12 months. They broke the day into hours, though their hours were not like ours. During summer, a daytime hour was longer because the sun stayed up longer. During winter, a daytime hour was shorter. Time was still soft. It bent and stretched with the seasons. It was not strict yet. Far away in ancient Babylon, priests were doing something similar. They watched the moon as it grew full and then faded away. They counted the days between each full moon and found that it took about 29 or 30 days. They used this to create months. 12 full moons made 1 year. But there was a problem. 12 moon cycles did not match perfectly with the seasons. After a few years, the calendar drifted out of place. Spring would arrive when the calendar said it was still winter, so they added extra months every few years to fix it. Time was becoming more organized, but it was still confusing. While farmers were counting moons and seasons, priests were counting something else. They were counting the moments between prayers. In many ancient cultures, prayer was not something you did whenever you felt like it. It had to be done at certain moments chosen by the gods or the position of the sun. Priests needed a way to know when those moments arrived, so they built tall stone towers and watched the shadows. When the shadow pointed in a certain direction, it was time to pray. When the sun reached the highest point in the sky, it was noon. This was the birth of the sundial. A sundial is simple. It is just a stick standing in the ground. The sun shines on the stick and creates a shadow. As the sun moves across the sky, the shadow moves too. You can mark lines on the ground where the shadow falls at different parts of the day: morning, midday, afternoon, evening. Now you have a way to divide the day into pieces. You can tell someone to meet you when the shadow reaches the third line. You can agree on a moment without being together. This is powerful. This is the beginning of shared time. But sundials only work when the sun is shining. At night or on cloudy days, they are useless. So humans invented other tools. In Egypt, they used water clocks. A water clock is a container with a small hole at the bottom. Water drips out slowly, and you measure time by how much water is left. In China, they burned special sticks of incense that took exactly 1 hour to burn all the way down. In Europe, people used candles marked with lines. Each line represented a certain amount of time. As the candle burned, you could see time passing. These tools were not perfect. Water clocks dripped faster when the weather was warm and slower when it was cold. Candles burned unevenly. Incense sticks could go out if the wind blew, but it did not matter. Humans now had a way to measure time even when the sun was not visible. Time was becoming independent. It no longer lived only in the sky. It was becoming part of objects, in tools, in machines. For most people, though, time was still not important. If you were a farmer, you woke when the rooster crowed. You worked until the sun began to set. You ate when you were hungry. You rested when you were tired. Yes, there were seasons to follow and harvests to plan, but your daily life was still loose and free. You did not need to know the exact hour. You only needed to feel the day moving around you. But in the cities, something different was happening. As cities grew larger, more people had to work together. Merchants needed to agree on when the market would open. Builders needed to know when the workers would arrive. Priests needed to ring bells to call people to prayer. Slowly, the people in power, the kings and priests and merchants, began to realize that if everyone followed the same schedule, life would be easier to control. If the bell rang and everyone stopped working at the same time, you could organize labor. You could collect taxes. You could hold trials. You could run an empire. So the bells began to ring. In medieval Europe, churches were built with tall towers. Inside the towers, large bells were hung. These bells were rung at specific times during the day. The first bell rang at dawn, another rang at midday, another at sunset, another before bed. The bells told people when to wake, when to pray, when to eat, when to sleep. For the first time in history, a whole city could hear the same signal at the same moment. Everyone was living inside the same rhythm. Time was no longer personal, it was public. At first, people did not mind. The bells were helpful. They brought order to a chaotic world. But slowly, something was changing. People began to feel like they had to obey the bells. If the bell rang and you were not at church, people would notice. If you did not stop working when the bell rang, you were breaking a rule. Time was becoming a law, and laws are not soft. They do not bend. They do not care how you feel. Then came the mechanical clock. This was one of the most important inventions in human history, and most people do not even realize it. The first mechanical clocks were built in Europe in the 1300s. They were huge machines made of iron gears and weights. They were placed in church towers and town squares. They did not have faces with hands like modern clocks. They simply rang bells at regular intervals. But they were different from water clocks and sundials because they did not depend on nature. They did not need the sun or the water or the wind. They ran on their own, powered by falling weights and spinning gears. They were the first machines that could create time. This was a strange and powerful idea. Before, time came from the sky. It was given by the sun and the moon and the stars. It was part of nature. But now, time came from a machine built by humans, a machine that could be adjusted, controlled, and owned. Time was no longer something you watched, it was something you made. As clocks spread across Europe, they began to change the way people thought. Monks in monasteries had always followed strict schedules. They prayed 7 times a day, every day at the same moments. They needed clocks to keep this rhythm, so monasteries became some of the first places to use mechanical clocks. The monks lived their entire lives according to the bells: wake, pray, work, eat, pray, sleep. Their day was divided into perfect pieces, like cutting a loaf of bread into even slices. This was called keeping the hours, and slowly this idea spread beyond the monastery walls. Merchants loved clocks. If you were running a business, you needed to know when your workers arrived and when they left. You needed to know how long a task took so you could charge the right price. Clocks let you measure labor. They turned work into something you could count. Before clocks, you paid a worker for finishing a job. After clocks, you paid a worker for the hours they spent. This was a huge change. Work was no longer about what you made. It was about how long you took to make it. Time was becoming money. In the 14 and 1500s, clocks began to shrink. Craftsmen learned to make smaller gears and springs. They built clocks that could fit on a table, and then clocks that could fit in your pocket. Owning a clock became a symbol of wealth and power. Kings carried pocket watches made of gold. Merchants hung clocks on their walls. Time was now something you could own, something you could carry with you, something that made you important. But for most ordinary people, clocks were still far away. Farmers did not need them. Laborers could not afford them. Life in the countryside moved the same way it had for centuries. Sunrise, sunset, seasons, harvests. The rhythm of nature was still in control. Time had not yet reached everyone. It was still creeping slowly, like water filling a valley. Then came the factories. In the late 1700s, machines were invented that could spin thread and weave cloth much faster than human hands. These machines needed power, so they were placed near rivers where water wheels could turn them. Workers were brought together in large buildings called factories. Hundreds of people worked side by side, operating machines that never got tired, never needed rest, and never stopped unless something broke. Factory owners quickly realized something important. Machines were expensive. If a machine sat still, it was wasting money. So the machines had to run all day, and the workers had to keep up. This meant everyone had to arrive at the same time. Everyone had to start at the same moment. Everyone had to work at the same speed. There could be no wandering in late, no taking a break when you felt like it, no leaving early because the sun was setting. The factory did not care about the sun. It cared about the clock. So factory owners installed large clocks where everyone could see them. Bells rang to signal the start of work. Bells rang for lunch. Bells rang to go home. If you arrived late, you lost pay. If you left early, you were fired. Time was now your master. You did not control your day anymore. The clock controlled it. Your body might be tired, but the clock said, keep working. Your stomach might be hungry, but the clock said, wait. You were no longer living by your own rhythm. You were living by the rhythm of the machine. Children worked in the factories too. Some were as young as 5 or 6 years old. They stood for 12 or 14 hours a day, operating machines, cleaning floors, carrying materials. They had no time to play, no time to rest, no time to be children. The clock decided everything. This was the world that time created when it was given too much power. Outside the factories, life was changing too. Trains were invented. A train is a machine that runs on metal rails and carries people and goods from one city to another. Trains were fast. They could travel 50 or 60 miles in 1 hour. This was amazing. It used to take days to travel that far by horse. But trains created a problem. Every town had its own time. Before trains, it did not matter that your town's clock showed noon while the next town's clock showed 12:15. You never visited the next town at an exact moment. You just traveled there when you could. But trains ran on schedules. A train would leave at 9 in the morning and arrive at 2 in the afternoon. But who's 9? Who's 2? If every town had a different time, the schedule would fall apart. Trains would crash, people would miss their rides, chaos would spread. So the railroad companies did something bold. They forced every town along the railroad to use the same time. They called it railroad time. At first, people hated this. They said, why should we change our clocks to match a train? But slowly, they gave in. The trains were too important. They carried food, mail, news, and people. If you wanted to be part of the modern world, you had to follow railroad time. And so, one by one, towns surrendered. They set their clocks to match the railroad. Time was no longer local, it was becoming universal. In 1883, the United States divided the country into 4 time zones. Everyone in the same zone had to use the same time, even if the sun said something different. A few years later, the whole world agreed to divide the planet into 24 time zones, one for each hour of the day. The center line ran through Greenwich, England. This became 0. Every other time zone was measured from there. Now, no matter where you were on Earth, you could look at a clock and know exactly what time it was anywhere else. Time had become a grid that covered the entire planet. Wars made time even more important. In World War I, armies used trains to move soldiers and weapons. They used telegraphies to send messages across long distances. They used schedules to plan attacks. If 2 groups of soldiers were supposed to meet at dawn, they had to agree on exactly when dawn was. If a message said, attack at 6, everyone had to know the same 6. Seconds mattered. Minutes could mean life or death. Time became a weapon. Soldiers wore wristwatches so they could check the time without reaching into their pockets. Before the war, wristwatches were rare. People thought they were fragile and unnecessary. But in the muddy trenches, pulling out a pocket watch was slow and dangerous. A watch on your wrist was fast. You could glance down and know the time in an instant. After the war, millions of soldiers came home wearing wristwatches. They kept wearing them. Other people saw and wanted them too. Within a few years, wristwatches were everywhere. Time was now strapped to your body. You could never escape it. It was always there, ticking next to your skin. In the 1900s, factories began using a new system called scientific management. A man named Frederick Taylor believed that every job could be broken down into small steps, and every step could be timed. He would stand in a factory with a stopwatch and measure how long it took a worker to pick up a tool, tighten a bolt, or move a box. Then he would find the fastest way to do it and force every worker to do it that way. He turned human beings into parts of a machine. You were not allowed to think. You were not allowed to rest. You just had to move as fast as the stopwatch said you could. This made factories more efficient. They produced more goods in less time, but it also made workers feel like they were not human anymore. They were just hands, just bodies, just tools that the clock controlled. Some workers fought back. They went on strike. They demanded shorter hours and better treatment. Slowly, laws were passed. In some countries, the workday was shortened to 8 hours. Weekends were invented. But even with these changes, time still ruled. You still had to arrive on time. You still had to leave on time. You still had to follow the schedule. As cities grew, life became faster. Streetcars and buses ran on schedules. Offices opened and closed at exact times. Schools rang bells to move children from one class to the next. Restaurants served lunch only between 12 and 1. If you missed that window, you went hungry. Everything had a time. Everything had a deadline. The word deadline originally meant a line in a prison that if you crossed it, you would be shot. Now it meant a time that if you missed it, you would fail. Time had become dangerous. Radios brought time into every home. In the 1920s and 30s, radio stations broadcast news, music, and shows at specific times. Families would gather around the radio at 8 o'clock to hear their favorite program. If you missed it, it was gone. There was no way to replay it. You had to be there at the right time, or you lost it forever. Time was teaching people to obey. Then came World War II, and time became even stricter. Factories ran day and night to build planes, tanks, and ships. Workers were divided into shifts: the morning shift, the night shift, the graveyard shift. Some people worked while the sun was up. Others worked in total darkness. The clock decided when you were awake and when you slept. Your body tried to adjust, but it was hard. Humans are not designed to ignore the sun, but the war did not care. The machines needed to keep running. Time was more important than sleep. After the war, the world did not slow down. It sped up. Television was invented. Like radio, TV shows aired at exact times. You had to be home at 7:30 if you wanted to watch your show. If you were late, you missed it. Slowly, people began planning their lives around the TV schedule. Dinner had to be finished by 7. Kids had to be in bed by 9. The television became the new church bell, ringing out the rhythm of the evening. In the 1950s and 60s, more women began working outside the home. Now both parents had jobs. Both had schedules. Children had school, then sports, then music lessons, then homework. Every hour of the day was planned. Families kept calendars on the wall to track where everyone needed to be. Life became a puzzle of time slots. If one piece was late, the whole day collapsed. There was no extra time. There was no room for mistakes. Alarm clocks became louder and more reliable. You set the alarm before bed, and in the morning it screamed at you to wake up. It did not care if you were tired. It did not care if you were sick. It did not care if you had stayed up all night. The alarm rang, and you had to obey. You had to get up, get dressed, and rush out the door. If you were late, you lost your job. Time was no longer a tool. It was a tyrant. Fast food restaurants were invented to save time. You did not have to sit down and wait for a meal. You could order, pay, and eat in minutes. Drive-through windows let you eat without even leaving your car. Every part of life was being designed to go faster. Faster meals, faster travel, faster communication. But no matter how fast things got, there was never enough time. People felt more rushed than ever. In the 1980s and 90s, personal computers arrived. At first, they were supposed to save time. You could type a letter faster than writing it hand. You could do math faster than using a calculator. But soon, computers brought email. Now your boss could send you messages at any time of day. You were expected to reply quickly. Work began to follow you home. The boundary between work time and personal time started to disappear. Then came the internet. Suddenly, you could shop, learn, and talk to people on the other side of the world without leaving your house. Everything was instant. You did not have to wait for a letter to arrive in the mail. You did not have to go to the library to find information. You just clicked a button and it appeared. But this made people expect everything to be instant. If a website took more than a few seconds to load, you got frustrated. If someone did not reply to your message within an hour, you wondered what was wrong. Time was compressing. Seconds felt too long. Mobile phones made it worse. At first, a phone was just something you used at home. It sat on a table and you picked it up when it rang. But mobile phones went everywhere with you. Now people could reach you at any time. On the bus, at the park, in the bathroom. There was no escape. You were always available, always reachable, always connected. Then phones became smart. They did not just make calls, they checked email, they showed the news, they played games, they measured your steps, they tracked your sleep, they reminded you of meetings, they buzzed and beeped and glowed all day and all night. You could not ignore them. Every buzz was a command. Check me, answer me, do not forget me. The phone became a new kind of clock, counting not just hours, but every single moment of your attention. Social media appeared, platforms where you could share your thoughts, your photos, your life. At first, it seemed fun, but soon it became a competition. People posted constantly. They checked how many likes they got. They compared themselves to others. If you didn't post, you felt left out. If you didn't check, you felt like you were missing something. The platform wanted you to stay as long as possible. It was designed to keep you scrolling, clicking, refreshing. Time disappeared into the screen. Hours passed without you noticing. Delivery services promised to bring anything to your door in less than a day, then in less than an hour, then in 30 minutes. Companies tracked their workers with GPS. If a delivery driver took too long, they were punished. Every second was measured. Every route was optimized. Efficiency became everything. There was no room for rest, no room for mistakes, no room for being human. Calendars moved into phones. Now your schedule was always with you. Meetings were color-coded. Reminders popped up 15 minutes before an event. You could see your entire week at a glance. Every hour had a label. Every gap felt like wasted time. People began scheduling even their free time. Lunch with a friend was an appointment. Exercise was a calendar event. Even relaxation had to be planned. Fitness trackers counted your heartbeats. They measured how much you moved, how much you slept, how many calories you burned. They turned your body into data. You could see graphs of your life. Was today better than yesterday? Did you walk enough steps? Did you sleep enough hours? Your body was no longer yours to feel. It was something to measure, to optimize, to improve. Time was now inside you, counting every breath. Streaming services removed the last bit of waiting. You did not have to wait for a show to air on TV. You could watch anything, anytime. You could watch 10 episodes in a row without stopping. This was called binge watching. Time dissolved. You sat down at 8 in the evening and suddenly it was 3 in the morning. The sun came up, but you did not notice. The screen was always ready. Always waiting, always offering one more episode. Work hours stretched. Emails arrived at midnight. Messages appeared on weekends. Bosses expected you to always be ready. If you did not reply fast enough, someone else would get the job. Fear kept you checking your phone. Fear kept you working late. Fear kept you saying yes when you wanted to say no. Time was no longer divided into work and rest. It was all work. Rest was just the moment before the next message arrived. Children grew up with tablets in their hands. They learned to swipe before they learned to talk. They watched videos made just for them, videos that played one after another without stopping. The algorithm knew what they liked. It fed them more and more. Parents tried to set limits, but it was hard. Everyone else's child had a screen. Everyone else's child was connected. If your child was not, they felt left out. Time was being stolen earlier and ever earlier. Schools measured everything: grades, test scores, minutes spent reading, minutes spent on homework. Students were ranked and compared. Every activity was timed. Recess was 15 minutes. Lunch was 20. Class was 50. The bell rang and you moved. The bell rang and you stopped. There was no time to think deeply, no time to wonder, no time to be bored. Boredom used to be when the best ideas arrived, but now boredom was filled immediately with a screen. Cities never slept. Lights stayed on all night. Stores stayed open 24 hours. Trains and buses ran at all hours. You could work, shop, eat, and travel at any time of day. This was called convenience, but it also meant there was no natural end to the day. No moment when everything stopped. The city kept moving, and you were expected to keep moving with it. Even sleep became something to optimize. Apps tracked your sleep cycles. They told you when to go to bed and when to wake up. They measured how much deep sleep you got. They gave you a score. People tried to improve their score. They bought special mattresses, special pillows, special lights. Sleep was no longer rest. It was another task to manage, another part of life that time had claimed. The language people used began to change. They said they were spending time like it was money. They said they did not have time like it was a physical thing they could run out of. They said they were killing time when they had nothing to do, as if time was an enemy that had to be destroyed. Time had become so real in their minds that they forgot it was something humans invented. They forgot there was ever a world without it. Old people remembered a slower world. They remembered when stores closed on Sundays, when families ate dinner together without checking their phones, when you could go for a walk without anyone being able to find you. They told stories about this world, but young people could not imagine it. It sounded impossible. It sounded lonely. How could you survive without being connected? How could you know what was happening? How could you exist without checking the time? Some people tried to resist. They deleted their social media. They turned off their phones. They went to cabins in the woods where there was no internet. They tried to remember what it felt like to live without time pressing on them every second. For a few days, it felt strange. Then it felt calm. Then it felt free. But eventually they had to go back to the job, back to the city, back to the schedule. Time was waiting. It always was. There were places in the world where time moved differently. Small villages in the mountains, islands far from the mainland, communities that still farmed and fished the way their ancestors did. They did not wear watches. They did not check phones. They woke with the sun and slept with the stars. When you visited these places, you felt something you had forgotten, a slowness, a breathing, a sense that life was not a race. But these places were disappearing. Roads were built. Towers were raised. Signals reached even the most distant valleys. Time was coming for them too. The scientists studied time. They discovered it was not even constant. Time moved faster when you were far from the Earth. Time moved slower near a black hole. Time was bendable, stretchable, breakable. Einstein proved this. But none of it mattered to daily life. The clock on the wall did not care about relativity. It ticked the same way it always had. 1 second, 1 minute, 1 hour. The rules were simple. The rules were everywhere. Philosophers asked what time really was. Was it real, or was it just a tool humans made? If every clock in the world stopped, would time still exist? Or would we return to the old way? The way of sunrise and sunset, hunger and sleep, seasons and stars. No one knew the answer, but it did not matter. The clocks were not going to stop. Time was too useful, too powerful, too embedded in everything humans did. People began to feel something they could not name, a tiredness that sleep did not fix, a sense that life was moving too fast, that they were always behind, always late, always missing something. They worked harder, but there was always more work. They rushed faster, but there was always another deadline. They checked their phones 100 times a day, but they never felt caught up. Time had become a treadmill that never stopped. You could run as fast as you wanted, but you never got anywhere. Some nights, people lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. The room was dark. The house was quiet, but their minds were loud. They thought about everything they did not finish, everything they needed to do tomorrow, everything they were afraid of forgetting. They looked at the clock on the nightstand, the glowing numbers, the slow change from 1 minute to the next. They watched the time, and the time watched them back. They wanted to sleep, but sleep felt like wasting time. So they picked up their phone, they scrolled, they watched, they filled the silence with light and sound, and morning came before they were ready. The sun still rises, the sun still sets, the seasons still turn, the moon still moves across the sky. Nature does not care about clocks. Trees do not rush, rivers do not hurry, animals do not check the time. They simply live. But humans do not live that way anymore. Humans live by the clock. They wake to alarms. They eat by schedule. They work in shifts. They meet at exact times. They plan months ahead. They count down the days. They race against deadlines. They measure their lives in hours and minutes and seconds. They have forgotten what it feels like to simply be. Time is invisible, but it is everywhere. You cannot touch it, you cannot see it, but you feel it, every moment pressing against you. It is in the bells that ring, the alarms that scream, the notifications that buzz, the meetings that start, the deadlines that loom. It is in the way you walk faster to avoid being late, the way you eat faster to save 5 minutes, the way you talk faster because there is always something else to do. Time is the rhythm you no longer choose. It is the ruler you obey without question. It is the cage you built and then locked yourself inside. But time is also just an idea, a system, a tool. It was invented to solve problems, to organize life, to help people work together. It was not meant to control. It was not meant to exhaust. It was not meant to steal the quiet moments, the slow mornings, the long conversations, the deep thoughts. It was not meant to make you feel like you were always running, always behind, always failing. That is what happened when time stopped being a tool and became a master. Somewhere, in a forgotten corner of the world, there is still a place where the clock does not rule, where people move with the light, where the day unfolds without numbers, where time is something you feel, not something you fear. It is rare now, almost gone, but it exists, a reminder that another way is possible, that humans once lived without the ticking, that they can still remember, if they try, what it felt like to be free. The screen glows, the phone buzzes, the clock ticks, another second passes, another minute disappears, another hour is gone, and somewhere deep inside you feel it, the pulling, the rushing, the endless forward motion that never stops, never rests, never lets you catch your breath. You do not remember choosing this, but here you are, here we all are, living in the world that time built, moving through days that are counted, measured, divided, and sold. The sun rises, the sun sets, but you barely notice. You were too busy, too scheduled, too late. Time has won, and the story is not over. It is still being written, every second, every minute, every hour. The clock is still ticking, and you are still listening.